welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Tuesday, October 4th. I'm your host for today's program, and today we go straight to Fort Hall, Idaho on the Shoshone Bannock Reservation, where we talk with Mark Trahant, again, a little bit about what's going on in Washington, D.C., but also another developing issue in Indian country, food sovereignty. Good afternoon, Mark Trahant. Today we're going to talk with you from the Fort Hall Reservation where you're at, a little bit about just an update on what you're seeing in D.C., but I want to talk a little bit more about your what I call food sovereignty and your planting and growing and harvesting of corn, which I think lots of people are celebrating right now, and that's the harvest. We'll get back to that. Tell us what's going on in Washington, D.C. We got a resolution to keep the government open for what, 3, 4, 5 weeks or something?
Exactly. It's a short-term one. They're going to try to pass appropriations budgets. One of the discussions is whether to pass them on their own or wait for the super committee and merge them together.
Is this any help at all, the way they're doing this and stop? Yeah, I mean, we're talking about funding of this year's budget, which the budget process happened some time ago. Now they're getting the appropriations for the money. Is it kind of kill the ability to spend and plan?
How do you plan? That's exactly right. I mean, here it is, second day of the new fiscal year. If you're a budget manager and you think, this is what I want to do this year, here's a great idea. How do you plan to spend the money when it could fall apart in a few days? It's absolutely a broken process. Congress is broken beyond. I was watching Ken Burns' series on prohibition. And it's interesting how similar the times were and how divided the country was along different lines. But nonetheless, it's that kind of division. It's really deep and hard to fathom.
And continuously piecemeal. We've got this resolution getting us into November. It sounds like there's going to be another battle coming up into that.
Right.
A reauthorization or another appropriation or continuing resolution for 60 or 90 days, or are they talking about doing the whole year at this next resolution?
I don't think they have the votes to do the whole year. I really think that's what it boils down to, is they're trying to get what votes they can on any piece of bill. There's a new book out today by Michael Lewis, the guy who wrote The Blind Side and Moneyball and a number of books. The most recent one, The Big Short. And in his book, he talks about around the world how governments are broken. One of the chapters, and I just bought the book, so I haven't read it yet, but one of the chapters is about California. And California is everything voted on by the people, so the people have no one else to blame. And yet, it's classic. They want the services that government provides, but they don't want to vote to pay for them. And that's exactly where we're at on a larger scale of Congress. They want what government does, but they do not want to pay for it.
Indeed, that's interesting. So it could be massive program cuts. The super committee is coming together. There's actually people that are a little bit concerned about this. The stock market tells that story. I guess it's been down and up,
Yeah.
not very much up, but then there's a lot of pressures from Europe on this country too. When we come out on the other end, if we do, do you see a forecast that where we come out on the other end? Let's ask that question. Another year, another 2 years, another 5 years of rebuilding out of this so-called recession, which we just seem to be kind of stuck on. Where do you see it ending?
Well, Japan, it was a lost decade, and we're halfway to a lost decade. Easily another 5 years. I mean, we still haven't basically resolved the housing crisis. And a lot of that is kind of still the hangover from that. On top of that, while we're still trying to do that, you have governments around the world melting down. Greece is only a matter of time on when it's going to default. It could be a year, it could be 2 years. And when it does, then all kinds of things happen. One talk is that they'll leave the European Union and go back to their own currency, that they can devalue the drachma. But the problem with that is, what happens when you announce they're going to leave the currency? There's a run on the banks. They start running the banks in Greece, and then they say, well, Italy and Spain are next, and so they start bank runs there. I mean, it really is one of those problems that just snowballs no matter which direction you look at.
Is it because this whole capitalistic system, this world monetary system, I mean, how old is it? to some extent, it seems to me to be totally untested in its modern form. You know what
I think that is true. And there are varying degrees of whether or not whatever form of capitalism. I mean, let's just take the United States versus Europe, for example. In Europe, every company that competes with our company has a healthcare cost that's exactly zero. Healthcare is paid for by the state, so they don't even think about it. Whereas our healthcare costs, every company pays for it because we have this accident of history that employers provide healthcare. So those are the kind of things that create a tension that are over a long period of time. In Europe, on the other hand, what's attacking their kind of capitalistic system is they have extraordinarily generous pensions, much more generous than the United States. And there's no way that a smaller, younger population can afford to pay for those very generous pensions.
So it's kind of like a time situation, time bomb catching up with itself. Interesting that you have talked, and Winona LaDuke, and many other people, a slow move, a slow food movement, a step back to times when people used to grow their own food. And I actually made a presentation to the Lacuterie Community College last week that was about sovereignty, but I talked a lot about food sovereignty, the ability of a family, a clan, a tribe, a community of Indians and non-Indians in this region being able to feed itself as a way of finding its independence from rules and regulations and interference.
Right. I think it's going to become more important as the federal government, well, I'll just say it, as they collapse. Tribes are going to need to come up with their own policies for things like food and how to maintain the health of the people through food. I took my corn experience, there's other crops, but primarily corn, as kind of a personal query about whether an individual family could, in a reasonable fashion, grow enough corn for the year. What it would take in terms of time and effort. And I was surprised how doable it is. And you multiply that out, let's say a quarter of the families can do that. The numbers start to add up pretty quick in what you would need in less consumption. I also think there's some real opportunities. Nearly every tribe has powwow grounds that are only used a few days a year. And if you could take those same grounds and unleash local sharing of crops, I think you could create markets that are rivals those in the big cities.
Indeed. In fact, I heard from some people from Detroit. Cheryl Buswell had Facebooked me not too long ago saying in Detroit there's this great return to open and green areas from the devastation of the suburbs. Entire blocks that are being reconverted back into gardening
Right.
centers for people to feed themselves. You talked a little bit about the health impacts of good food. You talked about trying to grow corn. I understand your corn ended up 8 feet tall with the ears now. And what are people saying? You've got to clip them next year if you're going to use the same brand?
Somebody said that, but I don't believe it. I think there's too many good things in those tops that you want to keep, so I didn't listen to that advice.
Okay.
But our corn ears turned out fine after all. The thing we learned out of this year is you just have to be patient. When the state fair rolled around and people were showing off their yellow corn, we kept wondering when we were going to have ours. And really, the only reason we took them down this week was because we're probably going to get a frost Friday, and I wanted to pull them down before that. But we got a lot more production than we thought we had. It just all came at the very end.
Yeah, and that may be the possibility out of that a particular brand of corn. I know Winona LaDuke was talking about this short, 3.5, 4 foot tall Flint variety, frost resistant, drought resistance that Ojibwe and Cree people had pushed north up into Winnipeg, Ontario, Canada. Very short growing season.
Right.
Which means that maybe it's variety of corn to do different things. You're talking about soup corn, grinding corn for breads and things, seed corn for other things. You're learning a lot.
Yeah, we're going to do all three. We've got corn drying throughout the house, and I have a greenhouse outside that's jam-packed with it. And once it's dry, some of it we're going to pull off and use for seed corn. Others we're going to pull off and use for stews and food like that. And then probably at least half of it we're going to grind up into cornmeal. The one thing that was a great discovery was that all blue corn is not blue. The colors are just fascinating. There's some that are just bright red, almost a dark, almost a black. They're really beautiful ears.
Is that because when you get it all ground up, it has that hue rather than the diversity of hues, or is it just that up in at the Fort Hall reservation, blue corn turns out red, or what?
Actually, it's because when you turn it into cornmeal, most people add ash.
Okay. Well, that makes sense too, because when they're turning it into hominy, they're boiling it in ash, which also
Right.
does something to its ability to absorb water and preserve itself. So that's
Right.
interesting. So not only do you have to be a farmer, you have to be kind of like a culinary gardening person who understands the processing, how to process this stuff out,
Right.
how to can it, how to preserve it so you can get it through the winter, how you can mix it, and are you using any traditional other things, beans, squash?
Not yet. We might try next year. I'm going to expand. My big project in the spring is when we dig up to replant, I'm going to take the rows out, and I've been getting a water system ready, and I'm going to go with light water and see if I can cut the water consumption next year.
Is that like a drip system of some kind?
Exactly, exactly. It'll be buried in the ground drip system.
Yeah, and then you've got to work on your salmon fishing skills as well. We ran a video here of Darla Leslie netting fish on the
Right.
Klickitat River. Do Shoshone Bannocks net fish and so forth in that area
No,
as
we
well?
spear them. In fact, the word in Shoshone is the same as the word to hunt. And you walk up the streams and chase the salmon and spear them and drag them out.
Okay.
Um, and this year was an amazing run. And I was up there, um, didn't get any. I went a little, the water was just a little too high when I went up there. But this year there was a lot of fish, which augurs well for the next few years.
Well, that's good. We know some of them got by and they can spawn and continue their thing, but
That's right.
in the future, it may be that there might be some smoked salmon or pickled salmon as part of this native food basket that you're putting together in your mind.
A lot of people around here smoke salmon, and that definitely is a possibility. Um, I'm not adverse to using a freezer either.
Well, as long as it can be plugged in somewhere, Mark.
Right. Well, maybe that's the next step. I've been thinking about trying to. We have an abundance of wind here, so I've been toying with that idea down the road too.
Indeed, we're talking about putting some solar panels or something up here, which would at least produce enough electricity so that if there was a temporary outage of 5 or 6 hours or something, we could maintain servers and stuff like that. So
Oh, that makes sense.
there could be reasons to do that too. I mean, you can put it in the freezer unless you have a long-term outage, you're okay. But if you could somehow put a battery pack there for some subsistence lights and some power to do a few things, you might be on right track to become self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency and sovereignty. How's it fit together?
Oh, I think they're tied. I think this is going to be the generation in the next 20 to 50 years that figures out that real sovereignty means self-sufficiency, that everything else is just rented.
Mark, it was good talking to you today. We're going to catch up to you maybe next week again. I know you got some Washington, your eyeball on Washington, D.C., and we're going to come back here for some more updates. Where do we get your stuff? www.marktrahant.com?
That's it. Thanks.
We'll take a look there. Thanks a lot, Mark.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank you for joining with us and come back again soon.